Welcome to Faith Fondue, a new podcast featuring me, author and speaker Haley DeMaria, and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue will feature a melting pot of topics, ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. Each week will feature a theme, and the theme for this week's episode is Lent, Week 3, Fasting. And happy third Sunday in Lent. Prayer was our theme last week. Fasting is our theme this week. And I'm curious, Anne, what are your thoughts on fasting?
Hi, Haley. Yeah, good to be here. Week of March 7th. Fasting. I think I do associate it with Lent. I think that's important. And I think fasting, honestly, is a challenge. And it's probably why would you bring a challenge on yourself, to be honest? Who welcomes a challenge? I guess people do, right? Regularly, but fasting is the spiritual challenge. And so I think, it's part of many faith traditions for centuries. There's tremendous wisdom in it. And I would encourage anyone to maybe learn more about it, myself included. It seems like it's kind of a popular thing right now, Haley, right? I hear that in many health circles. You might have some familiarity with that. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting you say who welcomes a challenge. I think people welcome challenges in many ways, but maybe not a fasting challenge. I think the best part about welcoming a challenge is you have a reward at the end, right? So you set a challenge of, playing a great round of golf or a challenge of climbing a mountain, right? And there's that reward at the end where you actually did it. So maybe the challenge of fasting is, what's that reward and can we see it and is it tangible? The reward is great, but we don't always see it. But yeah, fasting is kind of a fad right now. You hear about intermittent fasting and don't ever Google it on your phone because it'll show up in every social media ad, for the next 2 weeks on your social media platforms. But I actually have tried it, the intermittent fasting, and I did it really at the recommendation of a friend of mine who is a nurse, an RN, and actually a registered dietitian as well. She's really into sort of natural health in the body and the way that the body heals itself. And that was one of the reasons she had explained it to me was I have, like many people, most people, certain foods that just kind of rip up my stomach, which isn't a pleasant thought. But so, for example, bagels. I love bagels. I've always loved bagels. I love a good salt bagel, in particular. So that's kind of a double whammy between the salt and the bagel itself. It
Eat
really,
bagels.
yeah, just upsets my stomach. And she said, your body needs to heal. And when you are constantly feeding it, it's constantly working and it doesn't have time to heal itself. And really the science in a very, very high level of the way intermittent fasting works is you're giving your stomach time to heal. So it takes a while, you're eating, and then it takes several hours to digest. And then you really have to let your stomach rest because, we all heal best when we're resting. So your stomach needs to do that as well. So I tried it. I did the 8-16 fast where you eat for 8 hours. I actually find that I eat more during a day when I limit it to those 8 hours. And then the 16 hours, of fasting. And it's amazing. After probably 6 to 8 months, and to this day, I can eat that salt bagel and I feel nothing. It's really amazing. And I think, it's given my body the natural time that it takes to heal. Now, that's just my story and my experience with it, but it really made me think about, what is fasting from a religious standpoint? Well, I think it's taking away outside forces. It's taking away, anything that we could consume that sort of takes away from the time that we need to heal spiritually or, our soul, right? When you really think about what fasting is it's an opportunity to bring us closer to God, and to really think about in those fasting hours what that means. So I'm not making a huge connection here between sort of this diet fad and and the religious fasting, but there is that connection of kind of removing outside forces to really bring us to what's important, and it's that sense of healing.
Yeah, Haley, I think I mean, I love an analogy, sports and spirituality, but I think that's something this week just to consider. I think that's a great there's a lot there in terms of a parallel, because when you were talking about the purpose of undertaking a challenge is a reward. And then I was thinking, in the spiritual life, how often are we really thinking about the rewards? And that's the question, from today's gospel, is when we look at the commandments, what is it in this life that we place above our importance? We put as the most important, and those are why we need to remove those things, because God is, and love of God and love of neighbor should be of primary importance. So a spiritual reward by fasting is interesting to think about, but also that like our souls need to be healed, because the bottom line, I think, a challenge, fasting is hard work. And I remember this when I coached cross country, when, for example, you are training, you're practicing, and girls would be like, wow, like today's practice was like hard. And I was like, yeah, like what part of being an athlete is just like, we're just going to go for a jog? No, I mean, we are intentional about our practice, and we make practice hard so that the race seems easy. That's where, successful runners can bear witness to that. So eating for 8 hours means there's 16 that you're not. And I would imagine for me, you said it got easier, but at some points it's got to be tough. There's got to be that internal debate, that challenge. But if you frame it thinking about the healing piece, that's super interesting to me.
Well, so is the idea of what you just mentioned about, we put in the hard works, you train hard so that the race is easy. Um, that's a great analogy for the way we live our life too, right? Life is hard right now. Life is hard on earth, so that the
True.
reward at the end is, you know,
Yeah.
easy. What we
Right.
strive for sure. So I had
So
an interesting week,
yeah.
kind of an exciting new adventure for me. I This week I started a monthly radio stint on the Charlie Adams show. It's WKVI in Indiana, and Charlie Adams was in South Bend working for a bit when I was a student, so he was familiar with the Notre Dame swim team bus accident and my story and recovery, but left South Bend really kind of before, before my first race and kind of the culmination of that. So he was aware of it, but didn't necessarily follow really quickly. And I was put in touch with him by a colleague of mine who I do a lot of compassionate care medical training with. And we had written this book called Advice from a Patient, which is really a compilation of stories. It's advice from a patient to those who give care. And so he had invited us on our show to talk about that book back in December. And then we just kind of reconnected and chatted, and he invited me back in January to talk about my book, What Though the Odds? And, just we kind of continued the dialogue. And, he said, I really think my listeners would love to hear from you on a regular basis, either talk about what's going on in the world. If there's a tragic event that happens, you provide such great insight that some people
Yeah.
can't. And so I did my first stint. It's Tuesday mornings. It'll be the first Tuesday of the month. It's, about 8 to 10 minutes, and he's a really great interviewer. I
Hmm.
have learned over the years that some people are really good. It's probably why he has his own radio show every morning.
Yeah.
And some people aren't. He knows how to keep the dialogue going. He is very familiar with the topic.
Yeah.
It's really easy to talk to him. I've been interviewed by some people who had no idea what I was going to say, or even what to ask me, and it was quite painful.
Hmm.
So it was exciting. So
Yeah.
I will look to do that once a month. It should be kind of fun. So we'll
That's
see
awesome.
where that goes. Yeah. Oh,
Congratulations.
thanks.
Well, yeah, wise of Charlie to recognize your gifts and talents. And yeah, I know I'm biased, but I do think you're great on the air. So,
Thank you.
but what a compliment to him as well, that, he has such a gift for, yeah, asking the right questions. And obviously, I think part of the questions is listening, but like you said, a certain knowledge about the person you're encountering. So I look forward to listening to that. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, that's not the only interview that was happening. It sounds like your son, Edward, had an interview for you as well.
He did. So my younger son Edward came to me this week, and I think he knew the answer to this, but I just think it just kind of struck me. He said, "Mom, were you alive when Pope John Paul II was Pope?" And
You horrified when he asked that question?
yes, quite horrified. And I actually had to look up the year that the year that he died, because
2004?
2005.
Okay.
Because it occurred to me, Edward was 2 when Pope John Paul II died.
Wow.
And, you and I, Anne, are the same age. So Pope John Paul II, even though I wasn't raised Catholic, he was such a visible fixture. He was, the Pope. He was very mobile, in a time when, he was on TV a lot and media was really picking up, but he was basically Pope for most of my life.
Yes. Right.
Um, so it was shocking to me that this very real present figure in my life is a historical figure to him.
Yeah.
But it was a really neat assignment. Edward really enjoys his theology classes. He's had great theology teachers, which I'm really grateful for, because, as you know, Anne, in some ways, being a theology teacher yourself, or teaching about sports and spirituality, the teacher makes all the difference. So I'm very grateful to those who are teaching him such an important topic. But we had to watch a video together about John Paul II, and then he had to interview me, someone who was alive during his papacy. And it was just really fun to talk to him about. Actually, it was really fun for me to sort of think about these questions and what Pope John Paul has meant, in my life. I'm not sure I'd actually thought about that
Hmm.
specifically, but it was
Yeah.
also really kind of neat to share that with him, talking about his humanity, talking about his work with children, and starting World Youth Day, and, what that's meant to some of my friends who really,
Yeah.
who attended, and then, became, really that influenced their careers. And,
Yes. Yeah.
um, just to
Probably in Denver, right? Did they go in Denver, your
yeah,
friends?
yes,
Hmm.
yep. And
Yeah.
then, I was a freshman in high school when John Paul II came and said Mass at, Arizona State University and Sun Devil Stadium. And,
Mhm.
I wasn't Catholic, but I was a freshman at Xavier at the time. So I was very aware, because a lot of my friends went and a lot of people I knew went. And I knew it was a really big deal for these Catholic families. And,
Yeah.
I remember the controversy because it was Sun Devil Stadium, and they had
Oh,
to,
you're kidding.
yeah,
Oh,
they
interesting.
they had to
Oh.
cover up any word devil and any pictures
Oh.
of the mascot, the devil. And,
Huh.
as a 13, 14-year-old girl, that's what I remember. But I knew that was a really big deal. And so it was really fun to reflect on John Paul II's life in a way that I guess I hadn't recently, and sort of the way he had influenced my life as well. So it's always neat it was kind of an unexpected midweek kind of pause and
Yeah.
reflection on theology.
Yeah. So I'm curious, for someone who was so young when John Paul II died, what's your sense of Edward's impressions, or what did he enjoy learning about him or in those conversations?
I'll have to ask him. I think
Yeah.
he enjoyed hearing my story. So I have a necklace that I wear all the time. And he knew that right away. I said, I have this necklace I wear. He goes, "Oh, yeah, I know." That I bought in Rome, and it's the Alpha, the Omega, and the sign of peace in the middle. And it was a kind of a logo is the wrong word, a symbol that John Paul II had designed, that he used whenever he had meetings of all of the world religion
Hmm.
leaders. So
Mhm. Yeah.
there was a big meeting in Assisi that he had brought together all world
Yeah.
leaders. And they actually
Yeah.
mentioned that in the video, which was kind of neat, because that
Mm.
was something that I had talked about with Edward. Um, so it was kind of, I think Edward actually enjoyed, I would have to ask him, but I get the sense in talking to him that he enjoyed hearing as much about kind of my personal experience with it. It's kind of fun to learn things about your parents that you didn't really know and see them as
Yeah.
people and humans. So I think it was probably equal me and equal, John Paul II. I will say the one thing he found really fascinating, because he brought it up even before we watched the video, was, John Paul II's ability to go and forgive the man who shot
Oh,
him.
yeah. Isn't that story incredible? The Turkish.
Super powerful. So we
Yeah.
talked about that a
Yeah.
lot, because that
Yeah.
was really something
Yeah.
that stuck with him. So those are just
Yeah.
great conversations to have with anyone, but even for myself, to kind of reflect like
Yeah.
that.
Haley, that might be underreported, right? I mean, there's the possibility of that. Like, and they don't have a record of what their conversation was like. It was between the two of them. And yeah, what a powerful image. There is a photograph of it, and it is just incredible. But um, we were four when John Paul II was named Pope, and I actually remember the news for some reason at 4 years old. And so I was thinking, some ways, maybe that speaks to my, propensity towards
Your
the Catholic
calling.
faith,
Yeah.
that I could, yeah, think of that. And I was able to see him in 87, came to Monterey, came to San Francisco, but my parish didn't get tickets at Candlestick Park. So it was at Laguna Seca Raceway. But what a great life. And he went to Israel, he went to the Wailing Wall, he went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum. He would have done that. John Paul II, being Polish, had so many friends that died during World War II. He had so many friends who were Jews. And that was a tremendous, sign of, again, interfaith dialogue. So I love that you have that image that speaks to that. And it kind of leads to what I wanted to talk about this week. Speaking of interfaith dialogue, Pope Francis has been in Iraq. And if there's one place in the world I would love to go, honestly, it is Iraq, just because it's kind of this birthplace of civilization, Mesopotamia, and I'd love to see the, Babylonian gardens and things like that. But he has referred to this as a pilgrimage, and he says it's a penitential one. And I thought that was very humbling. And he said that he will visit as a pilgrim of peace and reconciliation, hoping to strengthen a sense of fraternity among all the nation's people of every ethnicity and religion. So he flew from Rome to Baghdad, and starting point, Baghdad is one of like the largest Arab cities, and people are like, oh, he's in Iran. And I was like, no, he's in Iraq. Like, let's not confuse these. Americans should have some familiarity with Baghdad. It's where Saddam Hussein was. And it's really, it's on the Tigris River, which again is this cradle of civilization. And I love that he ventured there. We're hearing about the Holy Father traveling again. And I think that to me is such a sign of hope. And I think it's also I think it's necessary that we see modeling, a leader of peace going to a place where this dialogue needs to happen.
Yes.
So people, it's not, again, it's not Iran and the Ayatollah. It's, Iraq has had some religious diversity. For example, I think like when I was in Israel, we learned like 25% of Jews identify as Iraqi Jews, or did at some point in time. And like, to me, that was something totally new. There's a small minority of Christians there. Many Christians have been persecuted throughout the world. And I really believe that needs to be understood, and people that we need to pray for, anyone who's persecuted, let alone because of their faith.
Right.
For this militant Islamic state that emerges, often and again. But why would Pope Francis go to Iraq? Well, we have a common father in faith. Christians, Jews, and Muslims all share Abraham. And I will admit, I too often forget that is, the roots of our faith is in Abraham. It's an Abrahamic faith, right? And this was the birthplace of Abraham. He's from the town of Ur. You are this, and so he's the patriarch for all of us. So he went to Ur. He also, this town is like, it goes back to 6,000 BC.
Wow.
It's just awesome.
Yeah.
So were we alive when the town was founded?
Yeah. At least Edward
No.
didn't come and ask me that.
And then he's going to go to Christian communities like Nineveh, and Nineveh is relevant because it came up in the ratings, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. Jonah is in Nineveh, and it's this town that was so viable and dynamic. It took days to cross it. It says that in scripture, but it's where a lot of Christians live. And so, the Holy Father's going to these places that are mentioned in scripture over again for like thousands of years ago, and they're still viable. They're still bustling with people. And what is that like to live in a place where, here in the United States, something's like from 100 years ago in San Francisco, it's like, wow, here it's, thousands of years.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah. But yeah, so I thought this was interesting when I was reading Catholic San Francisco. It said Nineveh is the historic Christian heartland of Iraq, where Christians have lived since Jesus's earthly ministry, when both St. Thomas brought the gospel message about AD 35, and he was aided by St. Jude. The pair were thought to base themselves in the northern city of Erbil in a modern day Kurdistan. And I read that, and that resonates with me because I have a friend who is Kurdish,
That's
and
amazing.
yeah, and I've struggled. Nabaz is his name, and I know him through a friend from Notre Dame. I've struggled to like understand his identity, so I'll talk to him all the time. I'm like, so you're Kurdish, but like, what does that mean? Like, you speak Kurdish? You speak English? Do you speak Arabic? And he's like, yes, but the Arabic I speak, I wouldn't be able to communicate with all people who speak Arabic, just like you wouldn't be able to speak to or understand somebody who's like Australian. And I was like, no, Nabaz, anyone who speaks English, like, yeah, there's an accent, but the analogy isn't working on me. And, he is fiercely Kurdish, but he grew up in Wales because I think they had to flee,
Mm.
flee Kurdistan. And then, during the war in Iraq, I think the US, protect Kurds. Kurds were being like, persecuted and killed. So, it's just, and there's all these different dynamics to that place that I am fascinated by, but just, it's not a common part of our daily lives or culture to talk about it. So I think it's great that Pope Francis is there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think we forget, especially during a time when we're living, in a pandemic, and especially when we're dealing with even a lot of the race issues and social justice issues that are going on in our country. Americans are notoriously self centered. And we really just kind of think about ourselves and our country and what affects us. And there, and I'm not saying this, this is a huge generalization. I am not talking about anybody specifically, but there are many Americans who, if it happens outside of our country and it doesn't affect them, they don't, it's not relevant to them. So I think it's really important for us to continue to learn about, these injustices that are going on in other parts of the world. And I think, the Holy Father brings that to us.
Yes. His witness of going somewhere. A friend said, what, and he's going in the middle of a pandemic. And I said,
Well, hopefully the end. Hopefully, hopefully it's not the middle anymore. I'm going to
there are
say
people that are offended by your comment there, Haley.
I'm
I just,
sure. My
yeah,
apologies.
I've always invited perspective during this pandemic. And I said, let's just pause for, this is a man who's 84 years old. The news was in January 14th. He and Pope Benedict received their vaccinations. They've had both. They've had the 2-week period after, and there's work to do.
Yeah.
There's work to do. I mean, if it's not Myanmar, where like thousands of people, I mean, equitable numbers either have been displaced or have literally lost their lives, or these Christians in the Middle East who are being persecuted. I mean, people are dying, and it's at a cost of like human hatred and greed and evil. And so if we can draw some attention to that and move beyond, are you wearing your mask or not? I welcome that. That's
Right.
what I'll say about that.
Well, and the Holy Father is traveling for good. He is traveling to bring awareness. He is traveling to bring hope. He is traveling to make a difference. It's not like he's just traveling to go on vacation. And you know what? If you want to travel and go on vacation, then kudos to you too, because
Yes.
it's been a
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
tough year. And
Right.
I,
Right.
I think one of the things that has really gotten out of hand, and in some ways justifiably, but we're judging a lot. And I think the one person maybe we should always just look at ourselves before we judge anyone else, especially the Holy Father.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the hope that he's brought to that area. I've seen some of the images, and we'll post some of those. Just meeting different Muslim leaders and having a dialogue. To me, Haley, it's really a sign of hope. I mean, this is somebody who I mean, it's a risk. These places are not necessarily always safe. That's like anywhere in the world, though. And he's saying this is important, and I'm going to take new steps because we need to move on in the sense of safely and responsibly. But we need to see that, with science here, we have our vaccinated leader who's taking the right precautions. We can continue God's work,
Right.
and be a person of penance. Like that is his MO. So um, that takes some spiritual, I don't know, strength to ask for forgiveness and bring, recognize the sorrows that have happened, but also maybe bring some joy that he can bring as a man of joy.
Well, and the Holy Father certainly has strength, and my guess is at times he gets his strength from fasting, and the prayer that he probably does during that time. But it's also we do need to all move on, and we can move on even here with our podcast, moving to our spiritual stew. And how do we move on and do God's work? Well, we follow what he asks us to do, and it was really kind of fun this week to hear. We hear about the Ten Commandments. It's kind of a catchphrase in some ways, and we most of us know what they are. I don't know if most people could name all 10, but it was kind of fun to hear the in the first reading today. The Ten Commandments. It's kind of this iconic, religious image and discussion. But it was really interesting in hearing Father Tom, the mass that Anne and I attend, him talk about the last commandment. And the commandments are in Exodus 20, and the last one says, or the one mentioned here, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male or female slave, nor his ox or ass, nor anything else that belongs to him.
Right.
So yes, I was on mute during mass. I chuckled when I heard the word ass. If you've listened to this podcast, that is just sort of the perennial word that makes us laugh in our house, living with two boys. I always love when it's part of the mass because it makes my children pay attention. So it made me smile hearing that word. But it's really interesting. The Ten Commandments, and we could spend, an entire podcast on each one of them. But the whole idea, thou shalt not covet. So first of all, the whole idea of a neighbor, right? We hear neighbor, and I'm thinking the people live next door to me. That is a very limited definition of neighbor, right? Our neighbor is our community. Our neighbor is the world. Our neighbor is pretty much everybody that's not ourselves. And not coveting, not wanting. There's that it's so much says so many things that Jesus asks us to do, and has so many things that are true in the Bible. It's so simple and yet oftentimes so hard to do.
Yeah.
But to not covet what other people have. It's a very fundamental way to live your life, to be happy and content with what we have, and to be grateful for what we have. But boy, it's so easy to look at someone else and someone else's
Yeah.
car or clothes or all those material things that look like fun, but really don't mean much.
Yeah. Well, Haley, thank you for the reminder, because I think that is essentially where the spiritual discipline that's gained from fasting, some people can look, acknowledge, and it's like, okay, like there's times where we have to move on, like recognize, yeah, I wish I had that. And then, but like what enables us to just not dwell in it or really let it stew, to use our word for spiritual stew. But like, that is where I think where fasting can pay dividends, because you do have that strengthening of soul. I mean, your soul is strengthened. And I think there's something to be said, for Gandhi, it was called Satyagraha, which was like civil disobedience, but really it was soul force. So the soul force is what enabled him to endure, beatings, different challenges that came their way, but the soul is strong. And that is a result of the fasting. So.
Oh, I like that, soul force.
Yeah,
I'll have to
it's
remember
good.
that.
It is. It is. I know we should all, myself included. Yeah. I think this Sunday's gospel is, it's just such an important story. It's a beautiful story. And anyone who's been to the campus at the University of Notre Dame, there is it's really awesome. And it hopefully doesn't get lost in the trees, so to speak. The sculpture by Ivan Mestrovic It's the, woman at the well. It's Christ's woman at the well. It's in front of O'Shaughnessy Hall, and it's on that South Quad. And a couple of things that are really important about this gospel passage. It's the longest conversation Jesus has with somebody recorded in scripture. So I think that's quite notable because, you would think it would probably be Peter, right? The leader, or one of the disciples, or
Right.
even it could have been, his mother, or, Mary and Martha, his close friends. But no, it's a woman who is a Samaritan woman, who is the enemy, who is considered like, I mean, she's largely, she's had several husbands. It's in the middle of the day. She's not with anyone. Like, this is going against so many customs and so many norms. And the fact that he talks to her in light of all of that is significant, and it's worth paying attention to. And, Alan Hunt of Dynamic Catholic says, like, Jesus initiates the conversation. And this would have never been done. Wrong gender, wrong race, wrong religion. But he offers her a gift. In spite of all that, he offers her a gift. And the gift is not just water, because that's why she's there. She's there for the water, but living water. And she doesn't ask for it. It's not something she can purchase. It's totally a gift. And he just says, would you like some? And what an incredible image. And I think that's really our takeaway, is like, what is living water, and what is it that God gives us that we don't ask for, right? That we can't purchase, and it's given to us. And what is, I love, water. You're somebody who loves the water, and I live near the water. I'm always like looking at it. It is a source of life for so many of us. So, that notion of living water, I think is really beautiful.
I love that. Yeah, especially because we need water to live. But there's something more powerful when Jesus is talking about living water. Yeah, that's a great image.
Yeah. And then Father Jim Martin, Jesuit priest, I recommend to our listeners following him. He is prolific on social media. And he's just I think he's just a great writer and speaker in general. But
Yeah.
he says many New Testament commentators point out that the woman at the well left behind her jug. And that is similar to Peter, who left behind his nets. Both leave behind what they have in order to follow Jesus. And I thought, wow, that is such an invitation at prayer. What do we need to leave behind? And that's really part of our Lenten journey. What are we trying to leave behind? So with Peter, I get it. A net is complex, it's weighted, it's tangled,
Yep.
we're tangled by it. And he leaves it to follow Jesus. But for her, it's this, cistern. I imagine it's heavy. It's something that she has to do. She needs. What do we need to leave behind in order to follow Jesus? And so I think that will be really for our takeaways in terms of, the melting pot. Like, I would like to think about that. What do I need to leave behind, and what is living water for me?
Right.
For you?
Well, and there, first of all, I love Father Jim Martin, and I love following him on social media. And, not too different than when we were talking about, the nether and the netherworld, and sort of that biblical reference into a mainstream video game. I love that he uses mainstream platforms, social media, to reach people in a different way. It's all about meeting people where they are, and
Yeah.
kind of, bringing religion to the masses. But it's all, with the nets and the jug, those are their livelihoods. Those are what sustain them. Peter needs the nets to catch the fish to eat, and the woman needs the jug for the water. They're leaving very life
Oh,
sustaining objects behind to follow Jesus. Those are necessities. Those aren't nice to haves.
yeah.
And that's, I think, really important for us to remember too when we're, going through this week and thinking about what can we leave behind. Let's not leave behind the nice to haves. It's just like fasting. It's just like giving up something for Lent. If you give up, if I'm going to give up black jelly beans for Lent, that means nothing. I don't like them. It has to be something meaningful. It has to be something that is, a sacrifice and
Yeah.
life sustaining. So that's a great takeaway for me this week. What are the essentials, the needs that I can leave behind, as opposed to just the nice to haves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it speaks to like the trust. Um, you know, does this woman trust Jesus after, this encounter? I mean, that's something to pray with too. They always say, Jim Martin's big on putting yourself in the scripture. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell? How does it feel? But then like really feeling like maybe placing yourself in the role of this woman, like who, in our most unaccepted selves, and when we are completely in the like wrong place at the wrong time, and like what would that be like would I trust Jesus to have the conversation? And I mean, the conversation only happens because she allows him, like she could have walked away, right? We wouldn't have the
Right.
story. Or she could have just said, I can't, I'm not allowed to be talking to you. Instead, she allows him to tell him what he already knows about her, which is pretty amazing. So,
Well, it's also a great reminder, to put when you put yourself in the story, to put yourself in Jesus's shoes too. You mentioned that here he's having a conversation with the, wrong gender, wrong
yeah,
race, all of
yeah,
that, but yet he approached her and welcomed her and offered her this gift. How
yeah,
often do we do that? How often are we
yeah,
putting ourselves in the position of reaching out to others who, might not, I don't want to say might be scary to us. That's a terrible word, but, might be someone we're afraid to approach. That's
hmm
probably a better word.
yeah,
Are we afraid to approach them and, offer them a gift? We shouldn't be. That's not what Jesus is teaching us. So, that's something for us to remember this week as we navigate through our week and are at the grocery store or in the parking lot or wherever it is, to remember to put ourselves, not only in the shoes of the woman at the well, but also of Jesus and how he approached life and people.
right. Well, even as you're saying that, Haley, I'm thinking like, how often do we have that opportunity to encounter somebody? I mean, is that something that happens regularly for us? I mean, I guess it's at an unexpected time and place. And I think maybe that's part of it. Cause I'm thinking about, okay, at school, like there's colleagues, maybe I'm not thrilled to talk to or something, but like, I don't know. I think like this challenge is, I think, I think this is the passage I need to pray with this week because there's a lot there.
And Anne, I think it happens more than you think. So
Yeah.
maybe your goal and maybe mine too this week is to actually just open our eyes and look around to see how many people we might encounter that we're not otherwise seeing.
Yes.
Um, who
Yes.
are there that we
Yes.
need to
Right.
maybe open our hearts to, because my guess is you encounter them more than you think you do.
Yeah.
We're just not seeing it, and that that happens to all of us. We're busy, we're rushed, we're trying to get here and there, we've got things to do. We're physically in one place but our mind is someplace else. But it's all part about being very present with where we are and just really looking at our neighbor.
Yeah. I thank you. You're absolutely right. And I remember I wrote about this one time on my blog, like, you probably had this experience. We've all had it, and it speaks to what you're saying. I will meet somebody at, my golf club also has a gym in a downtown facility, and inevitably or invariably, I should say, I'll meet somebody on the golf course, and they're like, "Oh, I see you all the time on the sixth floor." Haley, I've never seen this person, and I'm like, and I never say I'm not the type of person who would say, no, you're totally unfamiliar to me, or really. I always just play along with it. And I just say, oh yeah, of course. So yeah, it's early or whatever. Once they say that, then I start seeing them all the time. But for some reason, there are a lot of people that we don't see. So you
Yes.
are absolutely right. And I've learned that through that experience. So that is in a safer place, right? Whereas like in our communities, our workplaces, other things, yes, there are people that we are not seeing, and we're missing that encounter. So that
Well,
is my challenge. Thank
yeah,
you.
and missing that opportunity to have
Yeah.
those encounters and to give those gifts or to receive those gifts, as well,
Yeah.
however they come. So great takeaways for this week. Great conversation today, as always. What do we need to leave behind? What do we need to sort of shed ourselves of? What do we need to fast from to make sure, that we can truly follow those commandments, follow the work that Jesus is asking us to do, and to really open our eyes this week. Once we hopefully have fasted ourselves of the nice to haves, we can really open our eyes and see who's out there, and our neighbor, and what we can do to walk in the shoes, and to do the work that God is asking us to do. So, as always, Anne, I love your historical background, your historical contributions. I always learn something when I talk to you. I'm sure
It's a compliment coming from a history teacher, history major.
Well,
Yes.
Yes, we always have things to learn. So, have a great week. I look forward to our conversation next week. Is our third of the three topics of Lent. We'll be talking about almsgiving, which is such a funny word to me.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So I look forward to talking about that and what that means. And I hope everyone has a great week.
You too.
Thanks.
Thanks, Haley.